Hi, my name is Mark Tossell. I'm a pastor in Sydney, Australia, and I have struggled with depression for most of my adult life. There's a tremendous amount of stigma associated with depression and mental illness in general in society as a whole, and particularly among Bible believing Christians, unfortunately. And therefore, for many of the years, 30 years that I have wrestled with depression, much of that time it was hidden from everyone except perhaps my wife and maybe one or two close friends. At the age of 17, as an atheist, I became so very depressed that I almost had a breakdown. I began to wish that I were dead. And however, God used this in a wonderful way because I picked up a New Testament and I began to read it, and 3 months later was wonderfully saved. And I didn't struggle with depression for a short while after that. And then I began to have regular bouts that were fairly brief in length and not terribly severe. But as I got older, it began to get worse. And at about the age of probably my early 30s, I would say, as a young pastor, it began to get very serious. It began to affect me in many ways, my sleeping patterns, my appetite, my general frame of mind. I began to get very negative, very demotivated, very sad often. Other times I would just be emotionally numb. And I began to wish often that I were dead or that I had been born as someone else. And probably about 10 years ago, it got a great deal worse, and but I didn't know who to turn to. I didn't know who to talk to. As a Christian in a fundamental church, and especially as a pastor who's supposed to have it all together, I really didn't have anyone to go to that I felt would understand. I don't believe I ever heard anyone speak on the subject of depression, to my best recollection, in those 20 years of being a Christian. So I felt that it wasn't something that that good Christians struggle with, and that therefore, because I wrestled with despair, depression, that I was failing as a Christian, and I was ashamed of that. And that guilt made my situation a great deal worse, and no doubt Satan, the accuser of the brethren, was involved in that also. A life-changing event happened for me in 2005. Pastor Doug Fisher came to Australia, and he spoke at a conference not too far from me. And I was at an extremely low point in my life. I had been depressed for months. I was not suicidal. However, I would have been very, very glad to die. And I had asked God many times if he would even kill me. And I heard Pastor Fisher speak on the subject of depression. On the subject, I believe the sermon was about a shaken mind. And he talked about the battles of the mind, and he shared his own stories of severe depression, suicidal tendencies, how it almost ended very tragically. And I wept through the whole sermon, as you can imagine. I went to him afterward and spoke with him, and it was just unbelievably helpful to open up to someone who I felt would have compassion and not judge or condemn me, someone that would understand and would be able to help. And that began a very special relationship, a friendship with Pastor Fisher, who has helped me wonderfully over the last 10 years. A few years after that, depression began to get worse again. And I had refused to seek any kind of medical help. I'd always felt or been taught that psychiatry and psychology and medicines for those with mental health issues, what we call psychotropic medications, were not for Christians. And so I'd continued to get spiritual counsel. I had read some books, but I had never taken that step of realizing that I had a serious health issue. And probably 2 years ago, things began to get very bad. And then some tragedy hit in our lives. My wife got cancer. My son was diagnosed with fairly severe Asperger's syndrome, which is part of the autism spectrum, which has very significant impact on his behaviour and his interaction with people, his emotional regulation. I lost my voice for 4 months, which you can imagine is very traumatic for a preacher. We went through a very severe financial downturn in our own personal lives, and then we had some great struggles at church, and all of this came to pass in approximately about 12 months' time. I was already very weak emotionally and mentally prior to that, and these traumatic events drove me completely over the edge. I began to beg God to kill me on a daily basis. I would often wake up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and lie in bed for 2 or 3 hours thinking the most terrible, awful, negative, morbid thoughts that you can imagine. I despised myself. In my own mind, I would yell at myself, abuse myself verbally in my head, berate myself. I truly wished I were dead, and I even began to have ideas of suicide and begin to think of how I might do that. I also formed a fairly concrete plan of escape whereby I would take my savings, I would leave half to my wife, I would move to England where I was born, where I'm still a citizen, and I would disappear. I would leave my family, my wife, my son, my ministry. My testimony would be ruined. People would not even know if I were dead or alive, but I just wanted to get out. But thank God, through a wonderful doctor that I have, through a fantastic Christian psychologist, through loving friends and my dear wife, and through the help of exercise and medication and counsel and other things, God has helped me wonderfully. I took 4 months off from the church, what we call a sabbatical, or kind of like a furlough really, which I'd never taken a furlough in 16 years, and just focused on my family and on my own mental health, and God has really blessed. I still struggle, but I'm doing so much better. I have hope, and I want to live today, and I didn't have those things before. And I just want to encourage you. I know what it is to feel lost and alone and depressed for weeks and months on end. And there is hope for you. Our God is the God of hope. And I have a website. It's called hopeforhurting.net, hopeforhurting.net. And I've also written a book that God seems to be using. It's only been out for a few months. And it's called Hope, Help and Healing for the Depressed. And it's available in a hard copy. It's also available on Amazon in electronic format. And perhaps that may be a blessing to you. Or if you want to contact me and if I can help you in any way, if you go to that website, hopeforhurting.net, or if you just Google my name, Mark Tossell, Tossell, you'll be able to get in touch with me. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, and perhaps I can be a help to you. We have a God who's a God of hope and a God who does the impossible, and He is able to deliver us even from the depths and the darkness of the deepest despair. May the Lord richly bless you. Thank you.